Good evening. I'm glad that you are joining us today. Thank you so much for joining in. Hope that you were able to get connected okay. Got several people joining, jumping on right now, so I'm just going to kind of give them a couple of minutes to get on here. We've got about 30 people that have joined in. Again, I appreciate you being here and giving me a few minutes just to talk about what's going on. I have some great news, some good news, and then I have some not so good news. So I'll start with the not so good news. The not so good news is I told you guys last week that the Commissioner of Education was supposed to have a meeting on Tuesday or Thursday of this week to give us guidance on the fall opening of schools. And he didn't do that on Tuesday. And then today, about 10 o'clock this morning, I guess, he made an announcement that he was canceling his call for today. So we have still not received the official guidance from the state on opening districts for the fall. And he has told us that next Tuesday that we will get that guidance in our Tuesday call, and that that will be a lengthy call, and he will provide lots of information for us at that time. So that's not great news. I was very disappointed because I was hoping we would get a little more information from the state. Some of you have probably noticed on Facebook that he did make a comment today that the media is kind of running wild with. It's a little frustrating for me as a district leader that he canceled the meeting with the superintendents across the state today. And instead, he made a comment about schools to the general public that is very, very vague. So he made a comment today to the public that it will be safe for staff and students to return to school in person. And then he goes on and talks a little bit more. But he doesn't say whether it will be safe for us to return with restrictions or if we're just going to return. So it left it very wide open. So just want to caution you in thinking that he is saying in that comment that there aren't going to be restrictions that are going to be handed down from the state. There may not be. He may not say anything. But I have a feeling there will be some guidelines that we will have to follow. So we'll wait for that information next Tuesday. We'll see where we are with that. We have really been working hard. This is the good news. We've really been working hard over the last 2 days, all day yesterday and most of the day today. We had our committee meeting, which was our next year planning committee. And we were able to get so much done. I was so impressed. I had been so nervous about putting 64 people together in groups, but all with the task of coming up with a plan. And I just was so worried that we weren't going to make any progress. And these people who volunteered their time to come and to sit, it was staff, parents, and community members. They were amazing. Our administrators did an awesome job of leading. Our technology department knocked it out of the park, keeping us going. And my secretary did an outstanding job of making sure we were fed and that we had our papers run and we had packets for everybody. And so it was just a great process. We got to hear different opinions. We heard people who really disagreed as far as different topics that we talked about, but were all respectful and listened and came with an open mind. And it was just a really positive, productive time. And so I'm so thankful to those people that were there. And I appreciate the time that they took. And I would be happy to share that list with you if you want to talk to any of those people. But they are amazing and they did a wonderful job over the last 2 days. So tonight, I thought it would be really important if I shared with you, since I don't have the information from the commissioner, if I shared with you the plan for a recommendation that this committee is working on. Before I get into that, understand this, that I know changes are still going to happen. And this committee knows that. And we are already scheduling our next meeting in July to tweak what we've worked on so far. The other thing is that this is just a recommendation. So this recommendation will go to the school board, and then the school board will have the final vote or approval on what plan we will open school with. So I just want to kind of go over some things that we talked about. I know a lot of you are on your phones and some of you are just listening in and can't view this, but I'm going to share my screen for those that are viewing it on a computer or on their phones. So right now you should, it was loading up. So you should be able to see a summary page of the work that the committee did on the first day. So we had 64 people on the committee. Some were not able to attend, and so we ended up with mid-50s in attendance. And they were in different groups in different classrooms, and so they would talk and discuss in their groups on a topic, hash things out, and then they would come back together, and as a whole group virtually, we would talk about that topic. We would discuss pros and cons. We would discuss different opinions, and we would find out what their group, the majority of their group wanted. And then we would add a survey so that they could vote individually, because I didn't want anybody to feel like their individual voice was lost within a group. So we got their group opinions, and then we also asked for individual opinions, and we looked at those surveys and kind of what got the majority across the board. So the first topic that we talked about was the calendar. So the state has really been pushing districts to consider changing their calendars for this coming year. They put out a couple of different things. They put out a year-round calendar example. They put out extended break calendar example, and they put out a TEA COVID sample calendar. And so we took those ideas and we came up with our calendar we have already adopted that you guys have probably seen on our website. We adopted that back in February. And then we came up with 3 alternate calendars that had different things that the state had talked about doing in them so we could talk about them. The committee talked about each of the calendars in their groups. They came up with pros and cons on each calendar. And then when we came back, and then they decided on what they really wanted. And then when we came back as a whole group, we discussed all the pros and cons to each calendar. And then we talked about what each group majority wanted. And then we did our survey to find out what everybody wanted. Overwhelmingly, it was decided that we should keep the current calendar as part of our recommendation. So the committee will be recommending that we keep our current calendar as is with a couple of tweaks. So we worked on the tweaks yesterday. We came back, worked on the tweaks again today. And so we kind of finalized what those tweaks would be. The only changes to the calendar that is going to be the recommendation are going to be a couple of holidays that fall in April and January, a couple of staff days that we are going to recommend changing. And the reason for that change is what I'm going to talk to you about when we get down to the hybrid discussion. But it has to do with equal number of days for all of our students. So there's a couple of days that would just switch what day they fell on, a Friday or a Monday. And then the other thing was that we wanted to add 5 days to the end of the school year as flex days. So we won't use those days. There'll be like weather days. They'll be there, and if something happens, we have to make days up, then those days will already be in place for us to make those days up. If we don't need them, we don't use them, then we don't have to go to school on those 5 days. But they will be at the end of the school year as flexible days for our district. So those are the only 2 tweaks that we had to our current calendar. So start date remained the same, end date remained the same, except for those 5 flex days, and all the holidays kind of remain the same, except for a couple of staff days. So we had that discussion. Like I said, that discussion went on yesterday, and then it carried over, and we talked some more about that today. We had another vote. We actually voted on the calendar 2 or 3 times until we got down to what we really felt like was what the whole group could support. And so that will be, as of right now, that will be what this committee will recommend for calendars. So we then went to, and I'm going to kind of run through all of this for all of you. And then if you have questions, I'm going to open it up and you can ask questions about any of it. So just if you have questions, hang on and we're going to get to that point. The second part that we went to was yesterday's discussion was face-to-face instruction. So this is probably the most controversial piece in our society right now. This was about if we come back, when we come back, what is it going to look like, and what safety protocols are we going to put in place to protect Lexington ISD? So we kind of had to look at it in three ways. We have three options. Were we going to come back with a minimum protocols, which would be only doing the things that we were required to do by the state, which were the things that TEA told us we must do? Would we come back doing the required things and some of the should things or recommended things at a moderate level? Or would we do the maximum where we did everything the state recommended that we do? So overall, by a large margin, the committee decided that they felt like we should come back at a moderate level. So the things here that are listed, I'm just going to go through, and that is we're going to follow all of TEA's requirements. Now, not recommendations, requirements, those things that we don't have an option on. I listed that just as a reminder that there are things that we don't have a choice on, like the 45 square foot requirement. Hopefully next week that's appealed and he lifts that and it looks totally different. But if he doesn't, that is one that we would have to follow. It's 45 square feet per person in a classroom, which would mean a lot of our classrooms could not hold the grade levels that we have assigned to them. And that could force us into a situation of not having every kid on campus every day. So we're going to follow the things that we have to follow as a school district in Texas, but that TEA sets out. Then there were lots of things on there that the state said you should do this. We recommend you do this. You should consider this. And I refer to all of those as shoulds and not must. And so the committee went through and decided, and it took a little while. We had to go through a several step process to figure out which ones we all agreed on that should be requirements for LISD. We are going to do these. And so these are the ones that came out of things that we are going to do, or we're going to make a recommendation to the board that we want to do as LISD. So the first thing on that is temperature checks when kids are entering, when everybody's entering the building, staff, kids, parents, anybody will have a temperature check entering the building. Teachers and staff will self-screen before coming to work. And in that, we mean that the teachers will acknowledge that they haven't had a fever, they haven't been around anybody with COVID, that little screening questionnaire before they come to work. We believe that there should be hand sanitizers in every classroom. There should be hand sanitizer at every entrance to the building, and that people, when they enter, must use a hand sanitizer. We believe there should be a more frequent cleaning schedule, practices where we're cleaning the areas more frequently that students are using. Hand sanitizer when boarding the buses. So we'll add hand sanitizer to all the buses, and when kids get on, they'll get hand sanitizer. Buses will be disinfected and cleaned after every trip. Anyone living with a person who has a positive COVID case will be required to isolate, which would mean that if someone in my household had an active case of COVID, then I would also have to isolate myself. We will have isolation areas on each campus for students who are sick, so that we can keep them away from other students, and then that area will be disinfected after that student leaves campus. And then students will be served individually plated meals with disposable food items. So one of the shoulds was that students should eat in the classrooms, and that was not one that this committee voted on to be implemented by LISD, but they did believe that we should make sure that kids are served individually. There's not any kind of buffet type thing or serving on there, and that they're given a plate of food individually, and that they have disposable food items, service items. And then the last one is that students who are in close or frequent contact with a person who tests positive and become symptomatic will be tested before returning to school or will self-isolate for 10 days. And in that, we already have the rule that's a must that we have to follow with TEA, that if we have an active case, we have to notify everyone. And so once that notification happens, then we would also look at the people who were in close contact with that child or that student. So it would be the person who sat next to them in the classroom or at the same table or had that close contact with them. And so if that person developed any symptoms, started coughing, running a fever, then that person would also be sent home to be isolated for that 10 days. Or they could go be tested and come back to school if it was negative, of course. So those are kind of the face-to-face. Those are the only stipulations. You know, we had a discussion about masks. We had a discussion about being 6 feet apart in the classroom during group work or not having group work. We had the discussion about being 6 feet apart on the bus. So the committee did not vote to have any of those things as requirements, just suggestions and good practice. But the ones that I just listed for you are the ones that this committee is going to recommend that the Lexington ISD adopt as requirements for opening school. So that brought us to, that one took a while. And then that brought us to our discussion on hybrid instruction. So I talked to you last week a little bit about why we would even consider hybrid and why some schools are planning to go this route. And that is to minimize the number of kids in the classroom. So if the state continues with a restriction on the number of kids that can be in one classroom, then we don't have room for everybody to be here every day. And so we would have to split it where we weren't at school every day and some kids came one day and some kids came another day. So the thing that we had to talk about was, how do we do that? How do we decide what day? Do we all come one week and then the other group comes the next week? Do we do it Monday, Tuesday, or Friday, Thursday, Friday? How do we set that up? And so they had lots of discussions about all those plans. We actually voted on this a couple of times as well to get to a point where we really had a majority of the people that liked one particular way. And so we looked at our calendar, and a lot of our holidays fall on Mondays. And so that kind of played into the decision of what we would do. And then we talked a lot about needing to see kids frequently and not having too large a gaps between when we saw kids. Our ultimate goal is to see kids as much as possible. And so hybrid was much better to talk about than when we talked about remote, which is coming, but it is something that we want to look at. So what they decided as a recommendation for hybrid instruction, if we had to go hybrid, we would go Monday, everybody was remote. So teachers would be on campus. They would be doing planning, videoing, Google Classroom, and instructing for that day. But kids would be at home on Mondays. Then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Group A would be at school. And on Wednesdays and Fridays, Group B would be at school. So we've talked a lot about how do you divide kids up? How do you decide what kids will be at school? And we actually voted on that. How do you divide them up? How do you decide that? And we talked about geographically and making sure that everyone from one family comes to school on the same day. So it doesn't disrupt the family unit and they can help take care of each other. Those kind of things. Parents aren't going every day. And so we came up with, it's called a CABAB, which is Group A, then Group B, Group A, then Group B, and then the first day, which is Monday, is a C, which is remote. Everybody's remote on that day. So that's kind of where we were on hybrid. Now, towards the end of the day, that was yesterday's discussion. Towards the end of the day today, we got into the discussion about how hard it is for our pre-K through 2 kids to go every other day. I mean, it's hard on everybody. But how much difficulty there is to teach a child to read that you're not seeing every day. And so in that discussion, the committee thought that we should really try to consider bringing pre-K through 2 every day if we can possibly work it out. So we've talked about, would we have space? How would we make space? How would we have enough staff? Because you would have to have more staff. The other teachers would be teaching their kids. And so how would you have enough teachers to cover those kids? But it is something Mr. Ladd and I've kind of taught. Ms. Wolf has been in that conversation as well as some of the elementary teachers on, we could come up with solutions. It's what's best for kids. And so in the event that we would have to go hybrid, our first choice would be to figure a way for pre-K through 2 to still be able to come every day. And 3 through 12 then would be the hybrid AB situation. We may not have to go hybrid at all. That may be a moot point, but we want a plan in place in case we get to that point. Big thing that this committee felt is that if there's any way we could go remote instead of go hybrid instead of going completely remote, then it's better for kids. And so we really wanted a plan on some way that we can see kids if we're forced to a closure type situation, or a situation where we have to spread out more, where we're limited to the number of people that can be on campus. So that was our hybrid discussion that happened yesterday. And then again today, we had lots of discussion on that. And then yesterday, at the end of the day, we talked about closure. So what happens if we have to close? If the state says, okay, you have too many cases, or the state has too many cases, we're shutting schools down. So the very first thing, because it was right after the hybrid conversation, the very first thing the committee jumped to was we would much rather switch to hybrid if the state will let us. They may not let us if they're closing everybody down, but we definitely want to say that up front in this plan, is that if the state will let us go hybrid, so we at least get to see the kids some, that we would much rather do that than go complete remote. If they don't allow us to go hybrid, then we would go to remote so that we don't have to make up a bunch of days at the end of the year. That's the recommendation of this committee. So we would go remote as soon as we're closed down, so we don't have to make up those days, except for we have a few banked days. So we have a few minutes in our calendar, actually about 7 days of minutes in our calendar that is over what we're required to have. And so if we have to go remote, one of the things that the committee felt very strongly about was that we need to give our staff 1 day to prepare and then switch to that remote learning. And so we would use those banked minutes so we don't have to make them up, let the staff have a day to prepare, and then the next day go into a remote setting. Talked a lot about that and closures. One of the things that we're going to do as a district is we're going to provide every student in the district, pre-K through 12, a Chromebook. So everybody will have their own device. We're actually working on some programs because if any of you out there have 4-year-olds, you know the thought of a 4-year-old having to get on a Chromebook and log in is a little scary. But we are already working for some ways to make that easier for you. Our technology director, Mr. Patchke, has actually found where we can use cards, so kids learn to show the Chromebook their card and it logs them in as that person. And so we have lots of things that we're working on. How do we make it best for kids and easy for kids? The other thing is that when we start school, we're going to have requirements that teachers use these Chromebooks in their classrooms, and then we're going to have the consistent platform, Google Classroom, across the district, pre-K through 12, so that it's consistent on what we're seeing if we are closed, and also so that our kids get used to it. So even if we're open, our teachers are going to be using that platform in their classrooms at different times to teach kids how to use it, to teach parents how to use it. We're going to have videos on what parents should be looking for and how to get in there and see what's going on with your kids. And then in the event we have to be gone, we're hoping that it is more comfortable for the kids, more comfortable for the teachers, and more comfortable for the parents if it's something we're already practicing before we actually hit a closure time. So those are kind of the discussions we had on closures, and that ended that day. So then we came back today, and this is the summary for today that I've got up now. The first thing we did is we tweaked the calendar a little bit and talked a lot about the calendar and kind of got a final vote on what we're going to do there, which I've already told you. And then we had a discussion about athletics. So yesterday I had a lot of, not a lot, but several questions that ask about why is UIL letting them come up here and work out? Why isn't UIL working with TEA? Why isn't there kind of more of a partnership between them? And so I brought them some documents today that showed a little bit more about UIL. So the two documents that I brought were the strength and conditioning restrictions for athletics, and then the practices and rehearsals for band, marching bands. And so I showed them how there are all these restrictions. Now, outside restrictions are different than inside restrictions. So outside, they're only allowed to have like 15 in a group. And then on June 22nd, they're opening that up more and they can have 22 in a group. But inside, they can't. So inside on June the 22nd, they will be able to have 15 to a group, but that's as much as they'll let inside. So what I wanted to show them is they are working together. The other thing that I wanted to show is that yesterday there was a press release by UIL, and you've probably seen it on Facebook or the news. It's a big deal. UIL decided yesterday that they were going to suspend the rule that you cannot live stream your football games. So up until yesterday, it was a big no-no to broadcast your football games on Friday night, high school football games. But they are going to suspend that rule for a year so that all districts will be able to live broadcast Friday night football for high school. And so very interesting. They're saying they're doing it so everybody will be able to see, even those people who don't want to get out for risk of COVID, and also because there is a possibility they could limit the number of people at games. So we got to wait and see what that's going to look like. They haven't said that yet. That's just speculation. But the thing that I wanted everybody to know is down at the very bottom of that press release, it says all of these decisions must be approved by the Commissioner of Education. So all of the things that UIL is deciding is going through TEA for approval. So is there a fee for the live stream? Liz Cooper, I don't know that yet. I actually today had not thought about that, but I know that some districts are considering live stream packages. So if they eliminate that rule for all sports, one of the districts that I saw comments from today said that they may sell a package so that you get a tie-in to live stream for all sporting events for the year. They've not clarified whether you can charge or they'll allow you to charge or anything like that. They just said that it can be live streamed. So we'll wait and we'll see that. Repeat what I said about the band. The band on the UIL website, if you go to UIL website and you search for summer practices or rehearsals, there's a 5-page document that gives all of the rules for band practices and band rehearsals and all the restrictions for band. And I can send that to you if you can't find it, but it's on the UIL website, Texas UIL, and then look under band summer practices, and it should give you all that information on there. So after we talked about all that, and that was a lot of good discussion, then we went to our discussion on remote instruction, and this is where we really wanted to get some feedback. The state is telling us to prepare for going remote at some time this year. So we know we weren't perfect in the spring, and we know we made mistakes, and we know we have room for improvement. So this was a time for us to really talk about how can we be better. If we're going to be forced to do this, we want it to be the very best that it can be for our kids. And so in the individual groups of the committee, they talked about what went well in the spring and what needs to be improved. They made a list of both. And then we came back as a whole group and they reported on what their lists were, what went well, what did not go well. And I will say, you know, a couple of things that I think went well. I think that our staff worked hard and tried and were thrown into the fire, and I appreciate everything that they did there. I think our principals and our counselors did a great job with their announcements and being on Facebook and trying to give some normalcy to our kids to be able to see some faces. I think our parents did an outstanding job of stepping up into a role that they never planned to have, and some of them didn't want. So I think things for the situation went really well for us. I think there was lots of room for improvement, and we talked about that. You know, inconsistency was a big thing that came out today, is that we needed something consistent across the district, not only in the platform that we use, but in the expectations that we had for the classrooms. And so we've talked about how we can remedy that as a district and be more consistent across the board. We talked about accessibility and reliability with technology and what we could do to help that. And we're hoping devices can help a little bit, and then possibly hotspots and talking to our internet providers. We also talked about the amount of work and when things were due. Just all of those kind of things came out in the discussion, and we were able to really get some constructive criticism as a district on what we can do to help make things better for kids. And so we're going to take all of those notes and put it into our plans on what we're going to look at. The principals and I have already decided that we're going to have a day-long planning session of expectations. What are we going to expect in these classrooms? And then how are we going to monitor that? And how we know that things are going to happen? One of the things we know going into this whole process is it's going to look different. In the spring, we were in survival mode. We were trying to get through the rest of the year and get everything covered and kind of close out the year. If we have to go in remote for a length of time in the coming year, it's going to be about teaching new material, making sure our kids get everything that they need from the classroom. And so it's going to have to be a little more rigorous, and we're going to have to really make sure we have high expectations going on. We're going to have to make sure that our kids are making progress and are participating, and it is going to take a long time, and it's going to have to be where we kind of went a little lenient in the spring as far as time consuming. For them to really get the content, it's going to take more time, and so we're going to have to look at, you know, they normally would be sitting up here for 8 hours during the day. Is it going to take 8 hours? No, because that 8 hours they're here, it's not all instruction. But is it going to take 3 or 4 or 5 hours? Yes, it probably will, because we're going to be doing all of these different courses, and they have to be at the same quality and the same level as if they were sitting in the classroom. That's what the commissioner has told us. So we're going to have to beef that up a little bit if we're remote. And so we talked a lot about that, and how do we do that, and how do we ease kids into that, and how do we make sure they understand everything. So that was a great discussion today, and it gave the district a lot of things to think about and talk about. So the next thing that we talked about, which was our last big topic for the day, was what about the kids who stay at home? So the commissioner has already told us that we are required to provide instruction at the same level and quality of as the kids sitting in the classroom for anybody that chooses to stay at home. So if I don't want to send my kid back, then I, as a parent, have that opportunity to keep my child at home, and the district has to provide instruction for my child. So that just creates a lot of logistic questions about how do we do that, and how does it meet that same level. We already know that if you don't use the state adopted, the state created curriculum, that your curriculum, your remote curriculum, is going to have to go through a approval process through the state. And so we're not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but we were told that today. And so we're going to be waiting to kind of see how we make that a valid thing for our district, and how we make sure that those kids who have a choice of staying at home, how do we provide them the same opportunities that we provide the kids that are at school. A couple of things that we talked about with that is transportation, for events and things like that. Do we allow them to participate in extracurricular activities if they choose to stay at home? We talked a lot about there are kids in our district. I know of 3 or 4 of kids in district that have compromised immune systems, whose parents have already voiced that they will probably keep their kids at home. So that's one thing. They're afraid of COVID and they don't want their kids to be exposed, so they're going to keep them at home. But there are also parents who have said, you know, things went well for me in the spring. I'm just going to keep doing this remote thing. But I still want my kid to participate. And so we had a lot of discussion about that. The committee did believe that we should allow kids to participate even if they make the choice to stay at home. If we're limited in numbers, they also said, you know, those choices may actually help us out in our situation. And so we definitely shouldn't punish kids that are ending up helping the district out by staying at home. The only thing that they did say is they think there needs to be a real strict commitment form where we know the parents and the student understand what they're saying about remote instruction if they're just making that choice that they want to just continue remote instruction. And we're kind of locked into that this year because the commissioner has said that families will have that choice in the state of Texas to go remote if they want to go remote for this year. So after we talked about that, we talked about knowing that this is not the end, this is not the final plan. We know there's going to be tweaks, and we know a recommendation is not ready to go to the board yet, especially with the commissioner not giving us information until next Tuesday. And so we planned our next committee meeting for July the 6th. And so we're going to come back together for a couple hours and just kind of revamp and make sure we're still on the same page and make sure the commissioner's comments didn't change our plans. And then I also told them that I would be sending out an email next week that will summarize what the commissioner said. He's speaking next Tuesday. The principals are going to come sit with me in that meeting and listen to everything that he says, and then we're going to debrief and really see what impact that's going to have on our district. And so then I let all of these wonderful people who came and gave their time go for the day. And I kind of put the summary together this afternoon so that you could see that. Updated our staff on a staff call at 5 o'clock. I do a live at 5 with the staff on Thursdays. And so just to update them on what's going on. And so I did that and answered a couple of questions they had on what was going on, and then prepared to give you guys this information. So I know a couple of people have gone off while I've been talking. I apologize that I talked so long, but I wanted you to have all the information of all of the things that we talked about and some of the rationale behind some of the recommendations that we came up with. So now I will open it up to questions. Any questions that you guys have, I would be glad to answer. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can go back on here. Okay. And I'll entertain any questions that you have. Just let me know. Okay, let's see. I do want to say Mr. Will Banks, who is one of our band directors, just put on the comments that they will not be starting band rehearsals until mid-July, when they get additional UIL guidance. Their final schedule is still being hashed out. They're still planning that, but they will notify everybody when they get a plan in place. But it will be mid-July before they start having that. And then let's see, temperature checks on every delayed bus routes and school start times. Will you be able to trust parents and school survey? People can pre-medicate to falsify the temperature. Okay, so that discussion was had, and we've talked about how, you know, parents could give their children medication before school and it reduces the fever, and then they come to school with a fever. We have that situation already. That happens frequently. But what we want to do is do everything we can to protect kids, and this is one way that's probably not fail-proof, but we believe it's a step in the right direction to screen kids. So if we do get a fever, we know that there's definitely something we need to address there, and we would isolate that child at that point. We have no contact thermometers in the district. The state is also sending every school those type of thermometers as well. So we would have those on the bus for bus riders. We have talked about, because of the delay that it could cause, we've talked about the possibility of putting additional staff on the buses so that the bus driver does not have to do that, especially on our more crowded buses, that we would have someone else there, so it would possibly speed that process up a little bit. But we also believe that's something that the state has recommended that we do. So it says also no touch and forehead thermometers are not accurate. If a student or parent is standing waiting on a bus or outside of a building, their body temperature adjusts, so it's higher in the heat and lower in the cold. And I understand that. I think that we're just trying to do our best effort to protect kids as much as we can. And while there will always be those loopholes and those ways around knowing for sure what's there, that's the only thing we have to do to get a temperature. And those are the things the state is providing for us to use as a gauge for sick kids. Oh, wait a minute. Home on Mondays and off days. What about parents who have to work? Daycare may be too much money. Again, we don't want there to be a situation where kids are home at all. But if the regulations stay as they are right now, we can't have every kid on campus every day because of the restrictions of the square footage. And so if that stays in place, and I'm hoping that it doesn't, I'm hoping that he lifts that next week, but if that stays in place, we're kind of going to be locked into coming up with some sort of alternating schedule so that kids would have to be at home on remote part of the time. Ms. Cooper, will instruction be the same for hybrid and virtual? Also, would parents be able to change the method? On hybrid would be if we're forcing that way, and we really haven't talked about how it's going to look between hybrid and remote. If we're going to use the same, it'll depend on what we have to do to get our own and what the state's content looks like as to we decide which one of those it will be. Before we move in either direction, we'll make sure that we tell all parents exactly what we're using and what it's going to look like. We did say that we thought there might be a situation where they want to go remote and then they change their mind and say, you know what, never mind, I don't. And so we felt like we would have in there a grace period at the very beginning, not a long grace period, but a little grace period for them to kind of see what that's like and make sure that's what they want to do. And then if they want to come back, we would not allow them to come back and forth during a grading period. So once they're after the grace period and they're in that situation, then they would remain in remote or virtual until the end of the semester. And that way it doesn't affect us schedule wise or staff wise. So they kind of have to make that commitment for the semester if that's the choice that they make for their child. Has there been any discussion on the STAR testing requirements for the upcoming year? And there has been some discussion about that. So they are still going to test as of right now. They did give an extension on the testing calendar because so many people were changing their calendars and the possibility of being out for COVID things. They are going to allow us to extend the testing date, but only if we're giving online tests. So we don't online test all of our students, but those in like the high school is all online. So normally that test, let's say one of the high school tests is May 11th. Now we will have from May 11th to June 11th, and we as a district get to pick what day we're going to give that on virtually, online, not virtually, online. We get to pick what day we want to have for testing. That way, if we're out or something happens, we're closed, that there's still other days that we can use. So they extended the testing windows and are giving us more flexibility with that. But as of right now, they are saying we will still STAR test this coming year. What about kids that don't have internet? So we're going to, one of the things we're working on right now is trying to acquire hotspots. And something a lot of the districts around the state are doing is that we're coming up with ways to help provide that access to students who go remote, or if in the event that we have to close, then we might have some situations where we can do that. As a last resort, I'm hoping that the commissioner also approves some kind of paper copy. I'm just not sure what he's going to approve and what that's going to look like. He has said that for us to get credit for that instruction, that there's going to have to be daily interaction between the student and the teacher. And so I'm not sure what that would look like if we go to a paper packet mode. But that's something we're waiting for clarification on next week. And hopefully he'll be able to tell us exactly what that will look like. And we're going to be trying to eliminate those problems with access to the internet. We did on our survey, which I know was a virtual survey, so it's a little skewed, but on our survey, we had 95% of our responders who said that they had internet accessibility and were able to do remote instruction. So it's now we need to identify those people who don't have it and see what we can do as a district to help them in facilitating that. Okay, I think I missed somebody's up here earlier. Okay, somebody was a little late to the meeting and they're asking if it was recorded. It is recorded. Last week's is recorded as well. If you are on tonight and you didn't hear last week's, I encourage you to go listen to that. There were some great questions and great discussions. And so that's recorded. It's on our website. Tonight's will be right above that on the website, and you're welcome to listen to that to catch up with anything that you missed. And that's when I went over the committee stuff. So I encourage you to do that. Okay, let's see. Will the CABAB schedule affect before and after school sports and extracurriculars, since not all kids will be there every day? So that's a question that we kind of are going to pose to the coaches when we get to that point. If we were to go to a hybrid situation, then we would need to talk to our coaches. I think one of the groups today actually called Coach Mull during the group time, and he said that we'll work it out once the district kind of decides what we're going to do. Then we would work out how that looks. I'm sure that I'm not going to speak for the coaches because I don't know, but I'm going to assume that kids would still need to report to after school practices or rehearsals for any kind of extracurricular that they were involved in. And then what type of training will teachers have to ensure they're engaged in remote learning? So we're currently working to get Google Classroom training for all of our teachers. We actually have some opportunities this summer for those that have never used it before. And then we also have some refresher type things. And then before school starts, we're going to have an all-day session with our whole district to go into Google Classroom, train them, and then also make sure that they know the expectations of the district and they know what they need to complete and to have in their content area throughout the school year. We will be using Google Classroom, and that will be district-wide pre-K through 12. Every class will be using that. We will provide some parent tutorials on that as well, and videos and information that we'll be sending out to make sure that all the parents know what that looks like. We're going to try to make it as easy as possible. I think one of the big keys is that we practice using it before we actually have to use it and go remote. So that's something, an expectation we're going to have of the teachers, is that they are using that in their classrooms frequently, and that kids are turning things in on them sometimes, and that they're doing discussions and they're asking questions and all of those things that you can do through Google Classroom. We want them to do those things with them while we can kind of hold their hand through it, so that if we have to go away from the campus, that they're used to it and it's easier for them. And in that same process, we would be doing the same thing for parents. So we would have things for them to do, to look and to see and make sure they know what's going on with their kid in Google Classroom. So thank you for that comment too, of saying that it went well in the spring on Google Classroom. We do not plan on the temperature, taking temperature, delaying start times of school. We plan on having our start times and getting kids here. We had kids on campus really early every morning, and so we will have multiple people doing temperature checks. And so we'll try, it may take us a little while at first as we get things down and kind of work out the bugs, but our plan is for it not to affect our school start time. In the event of a hybrid schedule, how will groups A and B be decided? This committee, we talked a lot about locations of students because we don't want to split families up. We don't want to split households up. And if we just said certain grade levels came to school on certain times, then that could possibly split households up. We also want to be able to get all those kids that are in that group to school. So we talked a little bit about that. We want to just make sure that we are keeping our diversity in our population and that we're not segregating any group by doing it by location. And so we will be looking at those whole groups. The other thing we don't know about when we say geographically is we don't know about numbers. And so we really need to make it equal. And so it may be a random kind of grouping, starting with a foundation of geographical and then kind of mixing groups as we go. So we don't have an exact answer for you right now. I think that's something that we're still looking at and trying to figure out, how do we get half of our people here on one day and half of our people here on the other day. So we'll still work on that. And when I have an answer, a definitive answer, I promise you I will tell you what that is. But I would say we're still discussing that and kind of refining that to see what is the best way to divide up our kids. I apologize if this was answered. Will kids be wearing masks every day? No. Masks are not a requirement for kids, nor are they a requirement for adults. The committee looked at that recommendation, didn't feel like that was something that we wanted to require at LISD. It will be allowed, and it is still a state recommendation. So if a child wants to wear a mask or a parent wants a child to wear a mask, we will do our very best to make sure they keep it on. If an adult, a teacher or staff member want to wear a mask, then we encourage them to wear a mask, but we will not require kids nor adults to wear a mask at LISD. Other questions?
I had a question.
Okay.
What about students who have learning disabilities or have 504 plans or have speech or hearing stuff going on? How would that work?
So our special ed director has been working with Region 13 and TEA both to just make sure that we are meeting all the needs of our special education students, our 504 students, our dyslexia students, all those. We would still offer all of those services. We would just have to make sure that we're planning in a way that we can meet all of those needs. We had a discussion today about the possibility of bringing in some of those kids who need, it's hard to do a speech lesson when you're working with kids in speech virtually. That's a very difficult thing to do. So we talked about possibly having it in our schedule if we have to go remote or hybrid, that we bring those kids in to work with our speech therapist, or to work with our special education or 504 specialists with dyslexia or whatever, that we might have an alternate schedule for them, but those would be looked at on a case-by-case basis. We would have that discussion during their ARD meetings or their review meetings, so we can make sure that we're meeting whatever needs they individually have.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay, I would encourage you guys, if you do have questions and you haven't thought of them and you think about them later, because I just gave you a ton of information, feel free to email me. I answered a few questions last week after this was over. So if you think of things, feel free to email me or call the office, and I'd be happy to help you in any way that I can. I do want to know if you, as parents, we have about 50, I think we had 55 or 60 on here. If this is something you guys want me to continue to have until we kind of get a final plan in place, or do y'all want to wait until July? I'm happy to do whatever y'all want. I just kind of need to know if you want me to offer these or not. Do you want me to do a weekly thing, or do something next week after the commissioner speaks, or wait till July when we take a plan to the board? What is the thought of the group? Is that a yes, please for next week, or a yes, please? Information as it is available. Okay. So more than likely, fingers crossed, next Tuesday, we have a lot more information. So can we go ahead and just say that we will plan to do one of these next week? It may not be Thursday. It may be a different day, depending on when we have all our information kind of together. Okay, so basically, I think everybody's kind of responding that you feel like this is helpful, especially if there's new information. Okay, so this is what I'll do. It's Tuesday, and we'll get information, but I will go ahead and get something out that lets you know what night of the week. Next Thursday night, I already have an obligation, so I know it won't be Thursday, but I will figure out what day next week I can offer this, and if you can't be there on that night, it will be recorded, and we'll blast out Twitter and email, and just make sure that you know that I have completed one or I'm doing one. And if you missed it, it's recorded, and you are more than welcome to go and listen to it. And then if you have questions at that point, you can shoot me questions after that. Mr. Patsky, I noticed that I thought somebody else was wanting to speak. Was there somebody else that had a question? Okay. All right. I guess there are no more questions tonight. I know that was a lot of information. If you have questions, if you think of things you want to know that I didn't cover, I tried to cover as much of what we talked about as possible in these committee meetings, but I'm happy to share anything else with you that I know. Please let me know, contact the office. They'll get in touch with me, and I can get in touch with you. As we get more information, I will do another update next week, and then we'll kind of see where we are from there, and we may want to wait a week or two before we have another one. But I'm happy to talk to all of you. Very anxious to meet some of you in person, so I'm kind of getting familiar with your names, and so anxious to talk to you in person at some point. Thank you guys for joining in. I appreciate it. I appreciate your interest, your voice, and your input into the district. We want to do what's best for all of our kids. And so your input is important to me. So have a wonderful weekend. I appreciate all of you, and I will be in touch next week. Thanks.
A phone call.